Good evening, and welcome to this webinar about the essential steps when getting started with an IoT product. We'll wait just a couple minutes to have our stragglers join in on the webinar, and we'll get started promptly at 5 after. Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Let's get started. And thanks for joining us on this webinar. My name is Daniel Price. I'm the CEO of Breadware. And the goal for today is to talk through together the 6 essential first steps when starting a new IoT product. In addition, we'll spend some time talking about a program that's run out of Reno, Nevada called the Innovator program, which is an IoT Startup Bootcamp. So we'll get going. There's a live chat, so at any point in this webinar, feel free to type questions that you have into the chat, and we'll answer them in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The presentation will be pretty short, and then afterwards we'll have some time to just go through the topics that are on your minds. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. The image here on the title screen is representative of starting these IoT projects really is one of the hardest parts. There's several different directions to go and several different paths to spend time and resources on. So I'm hopeful that by talking through what we've defined as Breadware as the first steps will be helpful to you as you grow your startups and you grow your businesses. Now, let's start with the definition of IoT. And those of you who have watched many presentations in your life should immediately have a warning flag go off, because any presentation that starts with a definition is pure signs of laziness on the part of the presenter, as well as likely a boring presentation to come. So my apologies, but it felt like an appropriate place to start here. The Internet of Things is not a new concept, but it is a new term. It's the concept of machines talking to machines in a network grid, sending data to each other and making decisions without direct human interaction. And it's been useful in recent years for people, businesses, as well as institutions. And IoT has been a rapidly growing field. But why are we here today? We're here today as this Hardware Massive group because I imagine that many of the attendees of this webinar are looking at how they can integrate IoT into their businesses, or in fact, start new businesses using IoT. And why do we want to do this? It's because Internet of Things today presents an opportunity to create money, a way to create new business models, a way to create entirely new businesses. But here's the thing, and I have a picture here of a rather interesting IoT product called Portfolio. So this is a product that you can buy now on Amazon, I think eBay as well. It keeps track of how much money you have in your piggy bank. Very well-made product, works relatively well. The problem is not many people found an IoT piggy bank very useful. So one of the purposes of this talk is to point out that in order to reach these goals of a successful, profiting business in IoT, it's essential to have both a market and technology fit on your product. Portfolio was a great idea, maybe not a great IoT business model. So let's spend some time talking about what is IoT and what is not IoT, and use that as the context to wade through some of these talking points. When thinking about what is IoT, think about the 3 A's of IoT. An IoT product is aware, it is autonomous, and it creates data that is actionable. So what does this mean? An IoT product, really, I like to say, is just a sensor, a power source, and a radio that's collectively connected to the internet. So the sensors allow the product to be aware. They're able to see and respond to stimuli that's going around them in the outside world. They're autonomous because they can react to this stimuli, make decisions, transmit information without human intervention. And they're actionable because the data doesn't just get collected and sit somewhere. It's used to either run systems or to provide information to humans to then can make decisions. So to put some more visceral nature to this, here's a couple examples of IoT equals true for these products across consumer goods, medical, and transportation. In the upper left, you see several fitness wearables and medical wearable devices. You'll probably recognize some of them. In the upper right, there's an example of a consumer good IoT product that's used for tracking devices. In fact, this is a tracker that's used for tracking kids, dogs, keys, wallets, ex-wives, all sorts of things. The bottom left is an interesting product called the Da Vinci robot. Those of you more familiar with the medical space may have read about this robot before. What's interesting about it is it can be remotely controlled through the web, and the Da Vinci robot by Intuit was actually the first product that ever enabled a surgeon to do an open abdominal surgery on a patient on the opposite side of the Atlantic from them. And then the bottom right is an example of IoT in transportation. This is the Tesla Model X, which is one of the first well-known self-driving vehicles. Now let's switch gears and talk about what may not fall under the category of IoT. Remote controls, video cameras, building automation systems. You'll recognize many of these devices, and they may have one or two of the 3 A's of aware, autonomous, actionable, but these are not IoT products. Now, moving to the larger question on, why do we care about IoT? Why do it? Why get involved? The interesting thing about sitting here in 2018 is that the surveys and the stats and sort of the business analytics of the day indicate that digital disruption is going to replace 40% of today's incumbent companies and incumbent products within the next 5 years. I'll just pause for a moment because that's a statement that hasn't been true ever in history, but it's going to be true over the next 5 years, that products are changing. And it's the case that products are becoming more intelligent, they're becoming more connected. No longer are they inanimate physical objects, but software sort of runs in them and permeates through them. This means that there's huge opportunities for disruption on both past product lines and current product lines. Anything that you interact with or you use on a day-to-day may have an opportunity in a big way for disruption with Internet of Things. And that's what's so exciting about this space right now. But, and there's always a but, it's important to get it right. So here's a fascinating breakdown of some of the major IoT players over the last couple of years who did not make it. And these are all companies that hit over $50 million in value before they either went bankrupt or did an asset sale. And they failed for various reasons, but they can almost always be boiled down to not a market fit, such as the case with Jawbone, who didn't quite succeed against their other wearable competitors, or not a tech fit, which is the case for Juicero, which raised several $1 million on Kickstarter, but never was able to get the technology right to have a product that could fit their business model. So how do we avoid that? How do we succeed in IoT product development? Now, before we jump into the specifics of what we at Breadware consider the essential first 6 steps, I want to make a plug about what I consider a very exciting program here in Reno, Nevada called the Innovator. And Breadware actually happens to be a sponsor of the Innovator IoT Bootcamp. But it's an 8-week IoT hardware bootcamp that's hosted out of the Innovation Center and is sponsored by the Innovation Center, University of Nevada, Reno, Breadware, and multiple other technology companies. The Innovator provides $20,000 in funding in the form of a convertible note, about $20,000 of in-kind services. And the Innovator is for early stage IoT founders and early stage IoT startups that have a product concept, maybe are early in the stage of prototyping or business modeling and need an acceleration in order to get the business off the ground. This is a program where companies are going to work with experts to accelerate several aspects of their business. Their fundraising, their prototyping and product development, the commercialization plan, the operations, and the market validation. Several of the Breadware senior members operate as mentors for the technology in the program, and there's several other business, funding, and design mentors that also are part of this program to work with the firms and the companies that are coming in. This is the 2nd year of the Innovator program. Last year, amongst dozens of applications, there were 3 companies that were selected to be part of the program: Simple Sense, Think Biosolution, and SureGauge. All 3 of these companies have gone on to raise further rounds after the acceleration of the Innovator program. And you can look them up to see the interesting business models and interesting products that they're bringing into the IoT ecosystem. So applications are currently open for the Innovator. The program starts Monday, September 24th, so in just under 2 months. And I believe the application window is closing soon. So if this is interesting to you at all, please go check out renoinnovator.com and you can learn more information about the Innovator program. And I'm happy to answer more questions on it in the Q&A later. But let's go back to the task at hand and talk about Breadware's 6 essential first steps to an IoT product development. Now, number 1 is, who is your audience? Now, this is always a disappointing first step for me, coming from an engineering and tech background, but it's so important in this space of Internet of Things, where yes, you can make an IoT piggy bank, but is anyone really going to use it? So step one is, once you've identified a product that resonates with you and that you can see disrupting and really having a play in this digital ecosystem of 2018 and beyond, the next step is to know your market. Make sure you know who's going to use it, why they would use it, what's the value prop to them, and is it already out there? What's the competitive landscape? I'll tell you the nice thing about the Internet of Things space is that it's quite hard to copy ideas. There's a lot of technology effort that has to go into IoT product development. So I would encourage you, as you're doing your market validation, to not be too worried about sharing your idea. I think it's incredibly important to talk to the market, get a sense on how they like this concept that you're looking at building. Does it resonate with them? And because of the sheer amount of work that you yourself are going to go through to build this product, I would encourage you to not be too worried about other folks stealing your idea. It's more important to get validation on if they want your idea in the first place. After the market validation comes the business modeling. Again, we're deferring the actual tech development to hammer out some of the business-related aspects of the IoT journey. The interesting but complex thing about the Internet of Things is it's changed the game on how business models are made for hardware products. Back in the day, and not even so long ago, the way that you would set your business model for a hardware product is you would determine how much it's going to cost to make it, and then you multiply it by 3. And that's what you sold it for. That no longer is the case. With IoT, we've found blended hardware and software, and we've blended business models across cloud, software, subscription, and hardware industries. Now you can charge a subscription for your hardware product, and your customer never actually owns it. Or you can only charge for when they use it. Or you can only charge them for the data that they've collected. Or you can sell it as a normal hardware product and give all those as perks in kind. The point is, though, it's a much more complex game. And the business model around how you sell your product reflects in how customers view your product, and it reflects in how the cash flow and the financial plan for your startup manifests. So thinking through the business model is an extremely important second step in your IoT journey. And then step number 3, still we're deferring to tech build, is the sanity check. You've now gone down the road for a while and you think you validated your market. They've said this is a great idea, we're into it. You've worked through the business model. Now armed with that idea, with that validation, that business model, go back to the market, double check you're on the right track. Double check that they would be willing to pay, for example, monthly for this product, or that they would be excited about only paying for use for your product. You may need to educate your user because you're likely selling them on something that's very different of a product than they've interacted with before. So get their thoughts on it. Make sure that they can see themselves using it and they can get behind the business model and the market. Okay, so now for the techies in the room, we're getting towards the fun sections. This is the tech validation. As I said earlier, an IoT device at its core, it's really just a sensor or a couple sensors, a radio, and a power source that collectively connect to the internet. But there's always a technology complexity to make the device suited in your particular application or your particular vertical. So the time now is appropriate to validate that technology. Make sure that the sensors, the capabilities are out there to hit the requirements for your product to then enable your business model and your market fit. Now, sometimes it makes sense to actually build things in this stage as shown in the breadboard on the right, but often all you need to do at this stage is do research. Research that the sensors are out there, that they have the right tolerances, that the power sources are out there. And this is a good stage to start tapping and talking to industry experts. If you have someone in your network already, call them up and just go through it. I'm sure they'll get excited about it. And they'll give you a brain dump of all of the areas that you should look in to put together the technological pieces of your solution. Now, along with tech validation comes the constraints identification. This is step 5. With any product, you're looking at constraints. But the priority of these constraints varies depending on what you're building, what industry you're in, and your market. The typical constraints that we see in IoT products are, if it's battery powered, how long does the battery need to last? If it's not battery powered, how does it get plugged in? We see constraints on where is it deployed? Is it something that's indoors and connect to Wi-Fi to leverage data to the internet? Or is it outdoors and needs to be cellular connected or maybe even satellite connected? Another common constraint is how big can the device be? For most wearables, it's extremely important to minimize the device as much as possible. That said, for a lot of building infrastructure and industrial design, or so industrial IoT products, space is not a problem at all. It goes behind a wall, no one ever looks at it. And then another common constraint is the unit cost. What is the price sensitivity that your buyers have for this product? If they're sensitive to price, unit cost has to be a very high priority constraint. Now, finally, step number 6 is the proof of concept build. The interesting thing about starting an IoT prototype is there tends to be a high risk element that you want to focus on. The anatomy of an IoT prototype has to do with the hardware and software duality. There's going to be a physical hardware piece of your prototype, and then there's going to be a software piece of your prototype. And your software piece may run on a mobile application, or it may run on a web application. At this stage, you're not trying to build something that looks pretty. You're not trying to build something that is waterproof and can go out and do true field testing. What your goal is to validate the single largest risk point, whether it's a technological risk point or a market risk point, before you go any farther. Now, with the proof of concept build, and then armed with your business model and your market validation, with your proof of concept assuming that it's de-risked technology, de-risked market fit, oftentimes for startups, this is where you can start the fundraising journey. Typically, the next stage, which is called the engineer prototype stage, and then into the proof of design and the manufacturing, the stages after this are where you start spending real dollars. You can get up to the proof of concept build quite efficiently, quite frugally. If you have these 6 steps pretty well thought out, that's a great time to fundraise, and then you can use the investor money and the team that you're now assembling to move forward into the full product development and the ramp up stage into manufacturing. So, to take a quick summary, the 6 steps that Breadware takes for IoT product development. Number 1 is the market validation. Know your market, know your audience, validate that your product idea has a fit and a buyer out there. Second is, once you've identified the buyer, work through a business model that will be palatable to the buyer and work for your growing company. With those 2 things, go back and do a sanity check with the market. Talk through it with them, think through it with them. You'll learn things. Technology validation comes next. This may or may not include building anything, but it certainly will include doing market research and talking with the experts in your market network. That usually comes hand in hand with constraints identification for your product. And then finally, move into building your first proof of concept and de-risk the highest risk points for the technology or the market fit. Again, I'll talk about the Innovator one more time. For people who those 6 steps resonated with and are currently working through those 6 steps now, the Innovator may be a great fit to look into because the Innovator is going to work through those 6 steps for your business. With this, I'm going to open it up for questions. And thanks very much for being involved in the webinar and for listening. All right. I have one question from Kevin Brugich, which may be more of a statement, but it's well taken and well appreciated, which is to don't forget the need to test constraints and validation. Now, in the constraint stage, when you're looking at your unit costs and your sizes and your powers, absolutely, Kevin. This stage also is something that shouldn't be done in isolation. It should be done in conjunction with talking with your, tech experts in your network as well as your market. The unit cost is going to fit very snugly in with your business model. The battery life, you can't really decide how long your battery life for your product is going to be in isolation. This is going to be determined by the user story of your target audience. What's going to be palatable for them? If your product only lasts for 20 minutes, it may not be as nice of a product, even if all the feature sets are to die for. So I absolutely agree with that statement. I'll take a pause, and if there's any other questions, I'll happy to chat through them now, either on getting started with an IoT product or on the Innovator program and the initial cohort or what the journey is going to look like this year. If there aren't any more questions, we'll take a break, and this will be live and then posted onto YouTube. And so you can come back here and reference the information at a later date. All right, very good. We're going to wrap up now. Thanks so much for joining, and I hope everyone had a couple things that they found interesting and enjoyed the talk this afternoon and this evening. So feel free to reach out to me directly or to reach out to Breadware. You can reach me through Hardware Massive, and appreciate your time this evening.